Which Elijah Craig Barrel Proof is the best from 2024? There's only one way to find out. Let's put them in a blind. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Bourbon Hutch, and thanks so much for joining me on this journey through the world of whiskey. So today we are doing one of my favorite things that I get to do each year if I'm lucky enough to collect all three Elijah Craig Barrel Proof batches, and that is put them all head to head in a blind matchup and see which one is the best release from this year, or at least in my estimation, the best release. So this year I think Elijah Craig had sort of a middle of the road year in terms of most people's evaluation of the releases. I don't think anything was particularly terrible per se. It's hard to be bad when you're at least in that 10 to 12-year-old range of good bourbon from Heaven Hill. But nothing was truly spectacular. It was especially kind of a tumultuous year coming off of last year. They got rid of the age statement, but then they gave us C924 as the final release of the year, which was 13 years old, 7 months, 133 proof, and just a monster. That won my personal Whiskey of the Year bracket if you followed along last year, so a truly phenomenal batch. This year, again, a bit more of a middle of the road experience. Let's look at these particular bottles, see what's in the lineup, and then we'll dive into tasting the whiskey. So over here you've got A124. This bottle in particular is one of the youngest we've ever seen. It is only 10 years and 9 months old. It's also pretty low proof for the line here, which is 119 proof. In particular, I'm interested to see how this one does in the blind because it hasn't been my favorite batch in the past. When I reviewed it, I wasn't super high on it. I think it's passable as an Elijah Craig Barrel Proof, but kind of has an interesting profile. So we'll see how this one stacks up. In the middle here, you've got B524, which is kind of a beast in a lot of ways. It's 130.6 proof, so quite high proof for the line, and then it's 11 years and 2 months old. So still below that old 12-year-old age statement, but high proof and a very powerful batch. And then we've got the last release of the year, which I just acquired recently, 129 proof here on C924, and it's just 11 years flat. So you'll see that a big trend here is nothing even broaching or crossing that 12-year age statement. Will that be the trend continuing into future releases and future years? Who knows? We can always hold out hope that they'll give us some stuff that's back into that 12, even maybe 13-year-old range. But that does kind of level the playing field here, and it's going to be interesting to see which one kind of edges out the others among these three batches. All of these are available. MSRP this year is $75 on these bottles. So if you ask me, still a great value. I still think I'd recommend pretty much anybody to go out and buy these and add lots of value to your collection, because great whiskey from Heaven Hill at that price it's hard to say no to. All right, what I'm going to do now is clear off the bottles. We'll get set up with the full blind, and then we'll dive in. Okay, everybody, we've got the blind set up now. We've got our 3 glasses here. I have no idea what the order is. I actually have my fiance in town, so she was able to mix this up for me. Of course, I know what the bottles are, so it's not a double blind, but eager to dive in here. We'll call this one here glass 1, the middle one glass 2, and the one all the way on the end glass 3. I would typically call them A, B, C, but that could get a little confusing with the batches being called that as well. So we'll call this glass 1. All right, glass 1 on the nose. Yeah, that's nice. Caramely. Barrel char. Definitely some ethanol punch, and I've let these open up for about 10 minutes, still coming out a little hot. Some sort of creamy peanut experience, peanut brittle. But yeah, spicy. It's not super complex, but it's got that caramel, oak, peanut core to it, but a creamy kind of peanut experience. All right, let's go into glass 2 here on the nose. That's pretty nice too. Pretty similar to glass A. leaning really nicely into that caramel, peanut brittle DNA that I've come to know and love from the Elijah Craig and Heaven Hill. A little bit more oak maybe here. And there's something brighter too, like a cherry, black cherry, somewhere in that cherry popping experience a little bit there. It's nice and kind of refreshing right in the center. But it's still got that caramel, creamy peanut decadence to it. All right, let's go into glass 3 on the nose. This one feels dense, but not as prominent. It's definitely not as hot as the other two either. Which, if this is one of the higher proof ones, would be surprising. A little dry. Some oak. Even leaning into a little bit like of a dark fruit, like a plum experience on this one. A little darker and denser, but also not as hot and not as vibrant on the nose as glass 1 and 2. So glass 3 might need a little more time to open up, but it's also kind of inviting me in and asking me to learn a little bit more about it. All right. Of course, the noses are great to get a lot of information, and I think all these noses are quite solid. None of them is like necessarily a 10 out of 10, but they're very good. And that's great. That's a great start, but the palate tells us the most, of course. So let's dive in on glass 1 here on the palate. Cheers. Wow. Spice driven. That's how I'd characterize that one. Driven by its spice. Hard to tell if it's like a baking spice core to it or if it is higher proof and that's kind of coming across, but spice right at the center. Cherry, kind of a stewed cherry experience for me. And then oak, this kind of rich unfolding oak on this one. But the spice is right at the heart of it and kind of drives the experience. So maybe not the most complex. Maybe as we go into a couple more sips of it, it'll reveal some more layers, but big dose of that spice, but balanced out by some cherry and then a kind of rich oak. All right, let me get some water in between these sips. Then we'll go to glass 2 and glass 3. Okay, I've refreshed my palate. Let's dive into glass 2 on the palate now. Cheers. Okay, so this could be lower proof, could be less spice driven, but it isn't coming forward with as much spice. There's still spiciness to it because it's Elijah Craig barrel proof, but that's definitely toned down here. Still getting some of that nice simmering cherry. Caramel is here. It's had a little bit of that peanut brittle kind of creamy decadence to it. But there's a little bit of a tannic oak that's kind of settling in throughout the sip and then really hits me on the finish. So a little bit more drying, a little bit tobacco and oaky on the back end for me on this sip in particular. And again, just the spice was toned down, so that's not as core to this sip, at least on this run through. Okay, gonna get some more water and then we'll go to glass 3. Okay, so into glass 3, which seem the most different on the noses. Oh, there's kind of a cinnamon kick to this nose now. Nice, it's opening up. Interested to see how it holds up on the palate. Cheers. Interesting. This one has a really nice mouthfeel, but it's really leaning into this more astringent, oaky, got some spice to it. It's more of the oak, and that's really lingering for me. It's kind of wrapping around my whole palate. Just a touch bitter, a touch tannic, so maybe bordering up on the line of what could be seen as unpleasant in that realm. I don't think it necessarily crosses it, but I don't feel like it has as much of the caramel and cherry experience I got on some of these others, or the peanut brittle. It's really leaning more into that oak and kind of a spicy barrel char experience. Okay, So one of the things with an Elijah Craig barrel proof blind is that they're a little bit hard to tell apart because they share, of course, so much in common. So I'm going to go back through this lineup in reverse. I'm going to spend some time doing some A/B testing to really figure out my order and pick apart more flavors. But I'm going to fast forward through all of that for you guys, give you a little recap after it happens, and then reveal my order. So it should be quick for you, but I'm going to dig in here. Let's do it. All right, everybody. I have thoroughly gone through these. It's been really interesting how they've developed and unfolded. Let me give you a quick recap of how this has gone. So the most interesting glass for me by far has become glass 3. Started out with that a bit of an astringency, was a little bit harsh or taking me aback, but as it's opened up and unfolded, the oak on this thing has become glorious. It's awesome. And so really cool to see how that one has kind of developed over time. Glass 2 here has surprisingly kind of just been the most simplistic of the 3. And so at times it's felt like it's falling a little bit flat. Still very flavorful and very good, but I think the other 2 have got some interesting trajectories. And then glass 1 continues to be this spice-driven experience. It's actually added in a little bit of like a cocoa experience and chocolate, but the peanut brittle on the nose is there still. I think that nose is particularly really interesting. So let me break down the order here for you. In third place for me, just because it is that more simplistic option, is glass 2. Again, I have really no idea. I think I have one guess about which one is which, but I haven't tasted the A or B in a while. Just got the C. Let's see which one this is. Wow. So that is C924. Glass 2 in third place is the last release of the year. I do think it's flavorful. Brings that peanut, caramel, cherry experience. But it really was just a matter of the other 2, especially in a blind, standing out because they brought something more interesting to the table. Okay, I wasn't really expecting that because I have the A batch in my mind. It's not a particularly good batch, but I haven't tasted it in a while, so maybe it's opened up. For me, in second place today was glass 1. Spicy, really intriguing, has nuanced layers to it with the cocoa and all that, but it just kind of paled a little bit in comparison to glass 3, and glass 3 just kept drawing me back in. Let's see what glass 1 was. No way. That is the B batch, B524. You've got to be kidding me. I could have sworn it was the other way around. I thought that this spice-driven experience was from A124, which had that spiciness, but it's really the proof, I guess, here on B524 that's really driving this experience here. Yeah, that means our winner today is glass 3, A124. That is crazy. It's kind of off profile for Elijah Craig. It doesn't have that peanutty nature. It doesn't have a crazy amount of brown sugar even. It's really oaky and tobacco-y, and there's some spice mixed in there. There's a slight astringency, which is why I think a lot of people labeled it as very off profile at first. But it's just so different, and it really stood out among the crowd today. Wow, I am shocked. My one guess was that this was the B524 with that oak and that astringent nature, but that really opened up into something more decadent. It goes to show you, I mean, I haven't tasted this probably in 4 months, something like that. And it's got way more plum and dark cherry now than when I first opened it up. When I first opened it up, it did have that astringent quality that just kind of turned me off, and I haven't really gone back to it much, but wow. I will say I think it was a pretty close battle between the B batch and the A batch. The C batch just kind of is just like a right down the middle of the road Elijah Craig. It won't disappoint you, but it isn't the most special batch. B batch has this heat to it, spice driven. It's kind of a monster. The A batch has opened up beautifully and is really interesting. Maybe going a little younger for Elijah Craig at 10 years, 9 months has meant that it can be a little bit more off profile and therefore stand out among the crowd. Very fascinating. All right, so I know this is already probably a long video, but I did want to do one thing, which maybe is a little unfair, but is fun nonetheless, and that is compare these 3 releases to C923 from last year, see if any of them can even stand up to that absolute behemoth of a release. So I'm going to crack that open, get that out now, and we'll see how that one compares to the rest. All right, so I've got them lined up now, A, B, C, because that's actually the order they came in for me in the blind. So surprising. But let's compare them to C923. Haven't tasted this one in a while either, so it's going to be fun to dive back in. Okay. So surprisingly, I think it shares the most in common with A124, an astringent, oaky, black cherry, and vanilla power to this one. The black cherry is, that's what I've always loved about it, and it's just so good. All right, cheers. Oh yeah. Yeah. Nope. It's not really that close. The C923 is just at least a step, if not 2 above. The amount of that black cherry, the simmering spice, the oak is perfectly balanced in there. It's got a little bit of that peanut, but it just really leans into its aged characteristics. It's sweet and yet oaky. And so it's not astringent on the palate at all. Doesn't kind of lean into anything off profile necessarily, but it really turns up that black cherry and vanilla core, which it's just extracted so much from the barrel. It's superior. I mean, it is just better. Good to confirm that. I know that doesn't really help you this year in terms of like which batch to get. The A batch is the big shock today. Again, I haven't tasted it in a really long time. That astringent, slight off-profile thing that was going on really opened up. And then it got this plum, dark cherry that reminded me of the C923, some good spice, but it really leans into a slightly different, oakier profile, which is surprising given how young it is, but it definitely leans into that. And it's got this dustier, leathery kind of experience that I just found different. It differentiated itself. It's very, very good. So what that means is A124 is going to be going into my Whiskey of the Year bracket. That is what has come out victorious today. If you have a batch of this and you didn't particularly like it at first, revisit it and see if it's changed at all with a little bit of oxygen in the bottle. All right, everybody, would love to know in the comments below if you've tasted all 3 batches this year. Which ones did you gravitate towards? Which one was your favorite? Have you blinded them, and did one come out on top that surprised you? While you're at it, please consider hitting the like button on this video. That's what gets it out to the most people. And then, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the Bourbon Hutch YouTube channel. Again, we will be doing our Whiskey of the Year bracket soon. That's going to be a lot of fun, and we'll really break down some of the best offerings from the year. It's always a blast to finish out the year. Till I see you guys again for another video, all I can say is keep drinking good whiskey. Maybe revisit those batches that you haven't tasted in a while, and cheers.